They erased me from the family trust. That night Forbes put me on the front page. I never argued. I never explained. Sometimes the best way to respond is to build something they can't ignore. I used to believe there was something wrong with me. Not broken exactly, just misfit. Like I was born into the wrong family by accident and someone at the universe's sorting station had stamped the wrong last name on my birth certificate. The Collins family was old money East Coast royalty. My father wore legacy like a tailored suit. My mother was bred for garden parties and alumni luncheons. My brother Preston and sister Celeste were poster children for elite breeding. Preston with his early acceptance to Yale and a jawline carved for politics. Celeste with her cello recitals and a LinkedIn profile before she hit 16. And then there was me. I didn't do equestrian camps. I dismantled our home's Wi-Fi router to make it run faster. I had spent weeks building a photo booth app from scratch, programmed it to print instant Polaroids with digital filters. I thought they'd be proud. Instead, I got a tight smile from my mother and a whispered, "Why can't you just enjoy being a child?" That night, the family photo made it into the local paper. Everyone smiled in front of the estate's rose garden except me. I was cropped out. Not just in the paper. The framed copy in our hallway bore the same ghostly absence. When I asked about it, my mother replied, "You had food on your dress, darling." It wasn't presentable. That was the moment I learned how erasure could look like elegance. From there, the pattern never broke. My father would invite Preston to his investment meetings at Goldman Sachs and Celeste to museum galas. I got occasional reminders to smile more. They said I had potential, but only if I stopped wasting it on boyish distractions. I'd stay up past midnight learning to code in Python, building games, simulating hospital systems just to see if I could. But when I won first place at a regional science fair, my parents missed the ceremony. Preston had a tennis match that day. When Celeste got an A on her political theory midterm, the whole family went out to Mistral to celebrate. When I got a perfect score on my SAT math section, I got a passing. That's nice, sweetheart, over dry toast. My room became my sanctuary. It smelled like warm plastic from old laptops and soldering kits. I taught myself how to build servers out of Raspberry Pis and how to write code that could analyze patterns in patient data. I wasn't trying to be special. I was just trying to feel seen. But in a house that worshipped tradition, innovation wasn't a virtue, it was a threat. My mother once told me over brunch that girls who knew too much scared off the right kind of man. I remember staring at my poached egg thinking, then maybe I'm not looking for the right kind of man. Maybe I'm just looking for a life where I don't have to shrink. I used to believe family was supposed to be the one place where you didn't have to audition. But in the Collins household, worth had prerequisites. Ivy League credentials, polished dinner parties, small talk, and a resume that impressed other people's parents. I had none of that. What I had were notebooks filled with algorithms, apps no one cared to test, and dreams too big to fit in that colonial mansion with its white trim and centuries of rules. And still I kept showing up. I smiled in Christmas photos even when I was ignored. I helped set the table even when no one asked me to speak. I brought my laptop to the kitchen island and coded through the hum of cocktail parties. Because deep down I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just achieved enough, they would eventually look up and realize I'd been there all along. But they never did. Not really. Not until much, much later. That's the thing about being invisible. You start to believe you prefer it until one day you realize you've mistaken survival for belonging. And by then you've already built an entire identity around the hope that maybe one day the chair at the table will finally be pulled out for you. The irony is when they finally offered me a seat, it was too late. Because by then I had built my own table. But that's another story. This one begins with a girl standing outside a family photograph cropped out not by accident but by design. And it ends with the world finally seeing what the Collins family never could. I remember the day the Yale acceptance letter arrived. It was printed on thick ivory paper with the kind of serif font that screams old money and legacy. My father was practically glowing as he held the envelope like it contained a royal summons. Economics, he said, tapping the word on the offer letter with a proud smirk. The perfect foundation for taking your place in the family trust. My mother clapped politely and already started talking about who to call at the Yale Women's Society. Celeste squealed. Preston offered a high five I didn't return. But all I could think about was how none of them had asked me what I wanted. Because I had already accepted an offer, just not theirs. 1 week earlier, I had received an email with a blinking subject line. Welcome to Stanford School of Engineering. I stared at it for a full hour. Computer science, my dream, my direction. My damn choice. That night, I sat in my room holding both letters, one from the school they wanted, one from the school I chose, and I wrote my first rejection letter. Not to Yale, but to the Collins family expectations. I declined Yale and accepted Stanford. When I told them, I thought it would be a fight, but it was worse. It was silence. The kind that hollows a person. My father folded the Yale letter and dropped it in the trash like an expired coupon. If you want to squander your opportunities, we won't finance your rebellion, he said flatly. My mother added, Stanford is across the country, Avery. Do you even know anyone out there? Do they even have debutante events in California? Celeste laughed. Preston just walked away. That was the moment they cut me off. Tuition, housing, everything. I had a scholarship that covered partial tuition, but the rest was on me. I sold my childhood cello, tutored kids in algebra, took shifts at the campus coffee shop, and taught coding on Fiverr just to buy textbooks. My dorm was the size of a walk-in closet and smelled faintly of mold. The mattress was thinner than my pride, and the girl in the room next to mine played screamo metal at 2 a.m. like it was a religion. But for the first time in my life, I felt alive. I walked into lecture halls where nobody knew my last name. I spent hours in labs where it didn't matter what my family thought, only what I could build. I fell in love with algorithms and systems architecture the way other girls fell in love with senior year crushes. I coded until my wrists ached and my vision blurred. But every keystroke was a reminder I chose this. And I would make it worth it. There were nights I went to bed hungry, days I went to class with a fever, and weeks when I didn't hear from anyone back home. On Christmas break my freshman year, I stayed in the dorm alone. Celeste posted Instagram photos from Aspen. Preston was interning in London. My parents sent a card, no money, just a signature that looked like a legal formality. But that winter, something happened. I landed a research assistant position with a professor working on health tech algorithms. It didn't pay much, but it gave me access to data, real-world challenges, and mentors who saw more in me than potential. By my junior year, I was helping redesign patient scheduling systems for local clinics. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was real. And it was mine. I still remember the day I presented at a campus tech showcase, my first big moment. I'd built a basic prototype of what would eventually become PulseLink, though at the time it was just a scheduling AI that matched patients to doctors based on symptom clusters and urgency. The audience was small. No investors, no reporters. Just curious students and a few professors. But one woman came up to me afterward. She had tears in her eyes. I waited 4 months to see a specialist when I was sick, she said. What you're building could change everything. I nodded, choking on the lump in my throat. Because finally someone saw the thing I had seen all along. That this wasn't just code, it was connection. It was purpose. The kind my family never believed in. The kind they couldn't see because it didn't wear a suit or hang in a boardroom. My graduation day came and went without a single Collins in attendance. I walked out of Stanford with calluses on my fingers and fire in my chest. I didn't have connections, I didn't have family money, but I had something none of them could strip away: ownership of my life. I had rejected the path paved for me and built one with my own hands. And if I had to walk it alone, so be it. Because I wasn't chasing legacy anymore. I was building something better. I didn't have a desk, I had a corner. A sliver of drywall wedged between a busted filing cabinet and a window that didn't open. The first startup I worked for was in a crumbling office building in Queens, pretending to be Brooklyn, with flickering fluorescent lights and dreams much bigger than its budget. My title was Junior Systems Developer, but in reality, I was the girl who fixed everyone's printers, answered support tickets at 2 a.m., and built backend tools no one wanted to pay for. I remember sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, a bowl of instant noodles by my side, debugging a patient feedback loop while listening to my coworkers talk about Burning Man and Angel rounds I was never invited to pitch. The company was a health tech startup, big promises, little traction. But for me it was a lab. A hidden classroom. The place I learned how systems broke and how to make them work anyway. And in that solitude something started to grow. The first version of PulseLink wasn't even called PulseLink. It was a side project, a whisper of an idea born out of frustration. I saw patients, real people, wait weeks to see a specialist because no system knew how to triage properly. They were just numbers in queues. But I wanted to build a platform that could map symptoms to urgency and specialties, creating an intelligent match like dating apps but for healthcare that actually mattered. I told a few people. Most smiled politely. One guy in product laughed and said, "Cute idea. You should find a male co-founder, makes investors feel safer." He wasn't joking. And he wasn't wrong. I started pitching the prototype slideshow first, then a working build. I'd walk into WeWork lobbies wearing the only blazer I owned, clutching my laptop like it was armor, and watch male VCs smile with their mouths but not their eyes. One even said, "You're very articulate for a technical woman." I almost thanked him. Old habits die hard. There were meetings where they didn't bother to shake my hand, others where they asked if I was someone's assistant. Once a guy nodded toward my wireframes and said, "If you can get a man on your team, call me." It was like swimming in a pool of glass, every stroke forward left a cut. But I kept going. At night, I coded. During the day, I worked. On weekends, I watched TED Talks by women in tech like they were gospel, hoping their courage might rub off on me. I lived off canned beans and bad coffee, made pitch decks until my fingers cramped and refused to quit. Because I knew the problem was real. I saw it every day in the patient reports, in the misdiagnoses, in the fear people carried into every ER visit. And I knew I could fix one small piece of that if someone would just give me a shot. My apartment at the time was a 5th-floor walk-up with no heat, and every winter I had to tape the windows shut to keep out the wind. I'd sleep in sweatpants under 2 coats, dreaming about servers and seed rounds. The world didn't care, but I did. And that had to be enough. Until one night, after a particularly brutal pitch rejection where the investor told me to come back with a guy and a 5-year plan, I came home to an email that changed everything. It was short. 1 paragraph. "Hi Avery, I'm Dr. Miriam Yates. I used to work at Cedars-Sinai and now invest in digital health. A colleague forwarded your deck. Let's talk. I think you're building something important." I blinked. Then reread it 10 times. Then Googled her. She was real. A former surgeon turned health systems consultant turned angel investor. She had sat on NIH boards. She had started and exited her own companies. She was everything I wasn't yet. We zoomed 2 days later. I wore a white blouse to look serious and prayed the peeling wallpaper behind me wouldn't ruin the vibe. But she didn't care. She leaned in. She asked sharp questions. She made me explain the code logic behind the triage engine 3 times, and then she smiled. "You're the real deal," she said. "Everyone will tell you this is impossible. But I've been the only woman in the room. I know how it feels. I'll wire $150K by end of week if you're in." My throat tightened so much I could barely speak. I nodded and said something awkward like, "Thank you for believing in a nerd in a rent-controlled box." She laughed. "Just build the damn thing, Collins." That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't about the money. It was about someone finally seeing the thing I had seen in myself for so long. That I wasn't just a girl who could code, I was a builder, a founder. And I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. The office didn't even have a doorknob. Just a rusted latch you had to jiggle 3 times to open. It used to be a storage room in a forgotten co-working space in Gowanus, Brooklyn, One of those places where exposed brick is just code for drafty and the Wi-Fi cuts out every time someone uses the microwave. But it was ours. The beginning of PulseLink wasn't some glossy tech launch. It was two women in a windowless room with peeling linoleum floors, a coffee machine we rescued from the alley, and the kind of belief that doesn't need permission to exist. Grace came on board 3 days after the funding cleared. She was supposed to be an assistant admin help scheduling invoices, but by the end of the first week, she was troubleshooting bugs, building pitch decks, and mapping rollout plans like she'd been COO her whole life. I still don't know how I got that lucky. She had a background in healthcare ops, an obsession with sticky notes, and a sense of humor that kept us breathing when everything else felt like suffocating. We bought our desks from Craigslist. When they fell apart, we used boxes. When the AC broke during a July heatwave, we bought $3 fans from a bodega which immediately caught fire. So we worked in tank tops and sports bras surrounded by empty water bottles and code running on second-hand laptops that whined louder than subway brakes. At night, we'd roll out yoga mats and sleep on the floor if we slept at all. Grace once said, "We'll remember these nights like people remember war stories." I laughed and handed her another cup of instant ramen. We lived on ramen. And dollar pizza. And ambition. Every line of code I wrote felt like a rebellion. Every patient dashboard Grace mapped out was a promise that this wouldn't just be tech for tech's sake. It would matter. It would help someone's mother get seen sooner. Someone's son get diagnosed before it was too late. We didn't need AC. We had purpose. And maybe that's why we kept going. There were days when nothing worked. The database crashed. A bug corrupted 2 weeks of work. Grace once cried quietly into her coffee because a hospital admin told us we lacked institutional credibility. We were two women in a room that didn't even lock. No board, no pedigree. No men in Patagonia vests to vouch for us. But what we had was fire. One night around 3 a.m. we hit a milestone. We successfully ran our first triage simulation on live data, anonymized of course, from a community clinic. The platform correctly flagged 4 high-risk patients for same-day escalation. Grace stared at the screen like it was a newborn baby. I remember saying, "We just saved someone. We actually saved someone." And she whispered, "That's our proof." We didn't pop champagne. We didn't even have coffee left. But we sat there in our sweat-soaked clothes surrounded by code and hope and knew this was the start of something real. My father once told me, "You'll never lead anything if you don't learn to play golf." I think about that a lot. Usually when I'm deploying machine learning models at 2 a.m. while eating cereal from the box because we can't afford bowls. I haven't learned golf, but I have learned to lead. Not by status, but by stubbornness. Grace and I weren't building a company. We were building proof that women broke and underestimated could still rewrite the rules. That a vision born in heat and hunger could survive long enough to matter. And no one, no investor, no father, no gatekeeping system could take that away from us. Not anymore. I knew the dinner would sting, but I didn't expect it to feel like an execution. The Collins annual family dinner was always more performance than meal, an orchestrated evening where prestige was plated alongside dry duck breast, and the seating chart whispered who mattered and who didn't. I showed up in my old flats and a plain blazer. Deliberately quiet, deliberately forgettable. I left the Tesla a few blocks away and walked. Let them keep believing I still took the train. The house hadn't changed, chandeliers still too bright, family portraits still too proud, and my father still at the head of the table like a corporate CEO mistaking his children for shareholders. My mother offered her usual air kiss and a chili. "How's your little startup?" I smiled, the kind of smile that people use when they no longer expect to be seen. Then sat in my usual spot, the far corner next to the wine bucket, like I might be helpful passing drinks. Preston, of course, was already deep into a monologue about his new promotion, flexing acronyms like they were biceps. Celeste flashed her new sapphire engagement ring, fiancé freshly minted from an Ivy League and old money bloodline. I said nothing. I had grown used to invisibility. And then the room fell quiet. My father raised his glass. "Tonight we celebrate achievement, legacy, and responsibility." And on that note, your mother and I have reviewed the Collins Trust and made some adjustments. My stomach tightened. I didn't need to hear the rest, I already knew. Effective immediately, he continued, his voice wrapped in silk and stone. Avery will no longer be included in the inheritance structure. Her decisions, while creative, do not contribute to the long-term legacy of this family. I heard the words, but they didn't land like punches, they landed like silence. Calculated, cold. Like I was being erased with a polite smile. My mother dabbed her lips, avoiding eye contact. Preston looked smug. Celeste gave me a rehearsed expression of pity. And just when I thought that would be the worst part of the night, my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times. Emergency code from Grace. I stood up, ignoring my father's disapproving glance, and took the call without leaving the room. They said yes, Grace whispered, breathless. Sequoia's in. 35 million. PulseLink's valuation just hit 120 million. I didn't smile, I didn't gasp. I simply turned back to the table and said clearly and calmly, apologies, that was my team. We just closed our next funding round. PulseLink's now valued at $120 million. The silence that followed was not just stunned, it was seismic. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Preston blinked like he'd missed the plot. Celeste's mouth fell open. And my father, who had just cut me off in front of the family, looked like he'd been slapped with a stock report he didn't understand. I took my seat again slowly, like I was claiming it for the first time. But don't worry, I added, I'm not expecting dessert. Just noting that I now have more equity than this entire table combined. Aunt Marianne clapped. Just once. Then again. Well, I suppose someone's finally made something real in this family. I left early. I had a video call with new advisors, and my team was waiting to pop cheap champagne in a room with no air conditioning but a purpose that didn't need silverware. As I stepped out into the Connecticut night, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until now. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. They hadn't disowned me. They had released me. And I had no plans to come back for the chair they never wanted me to have. 3 days after PulseLink hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal, my father called. No apology, no acknowledgement of the public disowning that happened over lobster bisque. Just 4 words, crisp and calculated: lunch. The club. Thursday. I said yes, not because I owed him grace, but because I wanted to see how he'd look at me now that I had built something too big for them to ignore. I wore a simple navy blouse and flats, no pearls, no designer handbag. Just the same Cartier watch they'd never noticed before, a gift I gave myself after we closed Series A. The club looked exactly as I remembered: mahogany walls, whispers wrapped in cashmere, and men who'd never been interrupted in their lives. My father rose as I entered, offering the same firm handshake he gave clients and opponents. You look different, he said, scanning me like a prospectus. Running your own company must agree with you. I didn't sit until he did. You wanted to talk about the trust. He nodded as if I'd just brought up something awkward but necessary. The board would like to explore your involvement. There's renewed interest in aligning the trust with next-generation ventures. Translation: you're rich now, and that makes you relevant. And by next generation, I said, you mean me. He didn't flinch. You've demonstrated leadership, resilience, innovation. The Collins legacy must evolve, and we like you to be part of that evolution. I stared at him. The same man who told me coding wasn't a real career. The same man who said women didn't lead, they supported. And now he wanted my name on his legacy to update its value proposition. You know, I said, carefully folding my napkin, this would have meant something if you'd said it 2 years ago. Or even 2 weeks ago. But today, it just feels like rebranding. We made a mistake, he admitted, voice tight. You exceeded expectations. No, I corrected. You just had the wrong ones. The rest of lunch was polite, performative. Him pitching me on the future of the family foundation, me nodding like I hadn't already donated 10 times its annual impact through PulseLink's outreach programs. When we stood to leave, he extended his hand again. I hope you'll consider it. I shook it, but lightly. I'll let you know. If I have time between saving the healthcare system, Celeste called next. We're throwing a dinner for Brian's donors. He'd love your thoughts on digital health reform. Happy to speak, I replied. My policy consulting rate starts at $50,000. Friends and family rates no longer apply, she stammered. I didn't fill the silence. She never called back. Then came the gala, invites, the panel requests, the sudden flood of emails from people who once blinked right through me. I'd gone from irrelevant daughter to industry leader overnight. Except I hadn't changed. They had. They'd finally realized I wasn't just building code, I was building power. But the difference now was I didn't need them. I had already created my own circle, one that didn't require my last name to get through the door. The only invitation I accepted was from Aunt Marianne. It was a text that simply said, "You did it. They finally saw it. I saw it first. Let's get wine soon." On her porch barefoot with glasses of Cabernet and a sleepy cat curled between us, she asked, "So, are you going to take the seat on the trust?" I stared at the sunset for a long moment. "No," I said. "Let them keep the table. I built my own. And this one has room for the women who weren't born invited." She raised her glass. "To that." I smiled. "To that." It started with a broken lockbox and a key that didn't fit. I was at the old Collins estate one weekend, begrudgingly helping my mother sort through paperwork after a minor plumbing disaster soaked the East Wing. She'd called me because apparently you know how to deal with digital files, and I'd said yes because old habits die slowly and because part of me was still foolish enough to think maybe, just maybe, we could repair something. I wasn't prepared for what I'd find. The safe was behind a panel in the study bookshelf, exactly where a Collins cliché would place it. My mother had forgotten the code. I cracked it in 10 minutes with a laptop, a screwdriver, and a pinch of spite. Inside were what you'd expect: old deeds, dusty wills, original stock certificates from companies long since acquired. But at the very bottom, wedged under a framed family crest, I found a manila envelope marked only with my name. I froze. For a long moment, I didn't open it. I just stared, trying to decide whether I wanted to know whatever version of the truth my parents had stored in a dark box behind a false wall. But curiosity won, like it always did with me. Inside were 3 things: a copy of a tax filing from 5 years ago, a forged signature mine on a Collins Trust authorization form, and a typed letter from our family's lawyer stating that Miss Avery Collins consents to the Foundation's use of her name and role as Honorary Advisory Chair for International Shelter Initiatives. I read it twice. Then a third time. The Collins Trust had used my name, my identity, to funnel money through charitable fronts, reducing tax exposure by millions. They did it while I was in grad school. While I was working 3 jobs and eating canned soup and convincing myself that independence meant freedom even when it looked like hunger. I sat back, suddenly aware of the silence in the study. I hadn't heard my mother enter, but there she was, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, and that familiar tight smile, the one she wore at country club luncheons and family portraits. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said. I held up the envelope. "You forged my signature." "It was a technicality," she said, brushing it off like lint. "No harm was done. The Foundation does good work. It helped you in the long run. Your name is respected now." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not just anger but betrayal wrapped in politeness. "You used me. And you did it because you thought I'd never amount to anything." "We did what we thought was best for the family," she said, without a flicker of remorse. "It's always been about the family, Avery. That's what legacy means." "No," I said quietly. "Legacy means leaving something better than you found it. Not laundering it through the daughter you dismissed." I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just stood there holding proof of everything I'd always suspected but never dared articulate. I was never invisible, I was convenient. And when I became inconvenient, I was erased. I took the envelope, left the house without another word, and drove straight back to my apartment. For 2 nights, I didn't sleep. I paced. I drafted emails to journalists. I called 2 lawyers. I wrote a full exposé with timestamp scanned copies, internal memos. I had everything I needed to destroy them. And then I closed the laptop. Because in the deepest part of me, I knew exposing them wouldn't give me peace. It would make noise. Headlines, legal chaos. But not meaning. Not legacy. Not the kind I wanted. So instead, I did something quieter. I called the IRS not to report but to correct. I disassociated myself officially from the trust's filings. I signed legal affidavits with my attorneys. And I published a letter on my personal blog, not about them not naming names, just a piece titled "When Power Borrows Your Name Without Permission." It went viral in 24 hours. Young women, queer founders, underrepresented voices flooded my inbox. This happened to me too. Thank you for speaking. I didn't know it was okay to say no. I didn't burn them down. I just lit enough light to show what shadows look like. And somehow that felt more powerful than vengeance ever could. A week later, my father emailed me. A single sentence, "We should talk." I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the forged documents, slipped them into a fresh envelope, wrote in black ink across the front, "I know." And I won't forget. I mailed it to his office, not the house. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work on the foundation I had built, the company I had grown, and the kind of legacy that doesn't need hiding places behind bookshelves. Because the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about elevation. It's showing up uninvited and making your presence impossible to ignore. It's building something so solid that no one ever gets to use your name without asking again. It started at 2 a.m. Like most of my best work. I sat in my apartment with nothing but the blue glow of my laptop and a single question looping in my mind. What would I say if no one could silence me? The answer poured out of me faster than I could think, lines not written but released. Not a press release. Not a blog update. A manifesto, a reckoning. I titled it, "Invisible Signatures: How Power Borrows Women's Names Then Forgets Them." I didn't use the name Collins. I didn't have to. I wrote about how women in finance and tech are used as token board members, honorary advisors, optics in polished photos, while decisions are made in rooms they're not invited to. I wrote about how their names appear on filings, their faces on marketing decks, but their voices never reach the table. I wrote about the years I spent shrinking myself, working twice as hard for half the recognition, carrying more weight and getting less credit, and how I wasn't alone. I hit publish under a pseudonym. Just one sentence in the author bio: I build platforms. I was once asked to step aside from my own. Within 48 hours, it had over 1 million reads. Comments flooded in from women across industries. I thought it was just me. This is my story, word for word. They said I was too emotional to lead and then stole my pitch. Journalists speculated wildly about the author. Names like Sheryl Sandberg and Whitney Wolf were thrown around. A few guessed me. I didn't confirm. I didn't need the credit. I wanted the message to travel faster than my name ever could. And it did. A VC firm in San Francisco issued a public commitment to audit all advisory roles for consent. A healthcare accelerator launched a mentorship fund specifically for underrepresented female founders. An op-ed appeared in The Atlantic titled, "The Future of Legacy is Female If We Let Her Speak." For the first time in my life, my silence wasn't a weight, it was a choice, a boundary, power in its own form. My mother sent a text with a link to the article. "Was this you?" I left it on read. Preston posted something performative on LinkedIn about amplifying women's voices. I didn't comment. Because I wasn't writing for them anymore. I was writing for the girls coding in dorm rooms while their brothers got internships. For the women whose names appeared in press kits but never in pitch rooms. For every founder who signed a deal under pressure and watched her idea become someone else's exit strategy. One night, I got an email from a girl in Ohio. 16 years old. Her name was Maya. She'd read the article and sent it to her school counselor demanding that girls be allowed to take the Advanced Systems Design elective. "They told me it's too rigorous for someone like me," she wrote. "But now I'm not asking. I'm enrolling." I cried when I read it. Not because I felt proud, but because I felt recognized in a way I never had as a teenager. She didn't need my name, she needed my voice. And that was the shift. For so long I'd been obsessed with proving myself to my father, to the trust, to the industry. Now I was speaking to women who didn't care about my last name. They cared that I had made it out and spoke back. PulseLink's comms team begged me to claim authorship. It's good for brand visibility, they said. You're the face of change. But I refused. I wasn't interested in being a face. I wanted to be a force. And sometimes forces move better in silence. A month later, I got a letter, yes, an actual handwritten letter from a woman who'd served on 5 boards in the Midwest and had been quietly removed from all of them after she objected to how funds were being distributed. They kept the photo of me on the website, she wrote. But not my vote. She ended with, "Thank you for saying what I never could." I framed that letter. Not because I needed the praise, but because it reminded me why I couldn't stop. Why I wouldn't. My legacy wouldn't be defined by the family that tried to cut me out, but by the voices I helped amplify. That was the name I wanted remembered. The morning of the IPO, I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back, not because she looked different, but because she finally looked like someone I trusted. I wore no pearls. No blazer with shoulder pads borrowed from someone else's definition of power. Just a dark navy sheath, the Cartier watch, and a simple pair of heels that didn't hurt. "You ready?" Grace asked from the next room. Her voice was calm, but her fingers had been tapping the edge of the kitchen counter all morning. I smiled. I think we already did the hard part. The NASDAQ opening bell was remote streamed in from PulseLink's headquarters, where our entire team stood packed into a conference room filled with screens, wires, and a wall of sticky notes we never erased because they reminded us where we began. The energy was electric but grounded. Grace stood beside me. When the host called our names, she was introduced not as my assistant, not even as COO, but as co-founder. That was a correction long overdue. She blinked quickly, nodded once, and held my hand under the table. When we pressed the ceremonial button and the bell chimed, I didn't think about the valuation or the headlines or the sudden wealth that had just entered my bank account like a tidal wave. I thought about the summer we coded in a closet with no air conditioning, eating instant noodles and sweating through our t-shirts. I thought about the version of me who had once been told I'd never lead because I didn't play golf. I thought about the girls who had written to me after the anonymous article, the way they called me someone like us. And in that moment I understood something that would stay with me longer than the stock price ever could. The world doesn't change when you get power, it changes when you give it away. Grace's name now lived on the record right beside mine. That was the point. That was the win. Later that afternoon, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened the first bouquet of flowers. White lilies, navy ribbon, and a card that read, "Proud of you always. Love, Mom and Dad." I didn't reply. Another bouquet came from Celeste and Preston, something ostentatious with feathers, gold wrapping, and a note about being family first. I laughed when I read it. It was exactly what I expected: a performance, a rebrand, a last-ditch attempt to rewrite the narrative. But I didn't need their flowers. I already had the roots. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the lights of the city, sipping a glass of non-celebratory wine. I didn't want to toast, I just wanted to breathe. Below me, the world buzzed with articles, headlines, live interviews replaying my voice. Avery Collins, the woman who built a healthcare empire from a Brooklyn storage closet. The face of women-led innovation. Tech's quiet, revolutionary. I wasn't chasing their admiration anymore. I wasn't chasing anything. I had stopped running the moment I realized I was already there. And maybe that was the biggest twist of all. Not that I succeeded, but that I didn't need to scream about it. I let my silence do what my words never could. When you build something real, something that saves lives, lifts others, redefines legacy, you no longer have to explain why you matter. The world adjusts. The family who once erased you sends flowers. And you don't even need to answer the door. The text came at 6:17 a.m. just as the sky outside my window started turning from steel to soft gray. From Marianne, the longtime housekeeper who knew how to say only what was necessary. "Your father is in the hospital. He's asking for you." That was it. No pleading. No drama. No, it might be time wrapped in emotion. Just a message that dropped into my morning like a stone into still water. I didn't respond right away. I stared at it for a long time, coffee growing cold in my hand. It wasn't the first time I'd ignored a message from the Collins household, but this one hit different. Not because I still needed anything from him, but because I wasn't sure anymore whether I wanted to give him the thing he had never offered me: presence. By noon, I found myself pulling into the hospital parking lot. Not out of obligation. Not even curiosity. Maybe just for closure. Maybe to prove to myself that I had truly finally outgrown the version of me that once would have begged to be seen. The cardiac unit was quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Room 407. I stood at the door for a moment before pushing it open. There he was, Thomas Collins. The man who used to fill every room like a headline, now sunken into hospital white sheets hooked to wires and machines that beeped with cold indifference. His skin looked thinner. His hands, once so steady on a golf club or a contract, trembled slightly even at rest. He turned his head slowly. When our eyes met, there was no performance. Just exhaustion. And something else I hadn't seen in him before: a quiet kind of grief. "Avery," he rasped. I stepped in. "Didn't sit yet. Hi. They told me you might not come," he said after a long pause. I almost didn't. There was a silence between us that stretched like a rubber band, fragile but familiar. Then he said it, the words I never thought I'd hear from him. I was wrong. 3 small words, simple, uneventful. But they hit like thunder in my chest. I didn't say anything, not right away. I needed to feel them settle. To see if they held. "I know," I finally said. He nodded slowly. "I've watched everything from a distance. Your company. Your voice. The article. I knew that was you." Still, I didn't sit. "I wasn't just wrong about tech," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I was wrong about you. I told myself it was about protecting the family's reputation. That you were reckless. But really, you just didn't need us. And that scared me, that part I believed. Because the truth was, my independence had always been the one thing he couldn't control, and he never knew what to do with things he couldn't control. I used to think silence was disobedience," he said, eyes closed now. "But maybe you were just trying to survive us." That made me sit. "You don't owe me forgiveness," he added, still not looking at me. But I needed to say it. Before I don't have the time to. I looked at the man in front of me. The man who told me coding was for boys. Who called my company a hobby. Who cut me from the will in front of a dining room full of people and poured himself a scotch without blinking. I waited years for this apology. Imagined it. Rehearsed what I'd say. And yet now, hearing it, I felt no victory. No rage. Just release. "You're not the first man who tried to define me by what I wasn't," I said softly. "But you were the first who made me believe it for a while." That's what hurt. His jaw tightened. "I know. And I worked damn hard to unlearn that voice in my head. The one that said I needed to earn your love through achievement. Or submission." He blinked rapidly. Whether from emotion or pain, I couldn't tell. I continued. "I built PulseLink not to prove you wrong. But because I knew what I had to offer. I used to think it would matter to you eventually. That you'd see it, understand it, but I've stopped needing that. I see it now," he said, barely a whisper. "Too late. But I do." I stood. My voice was steady, but my palms were shaking. "I accept your apology. I do, not because you need it, but because I do. To let go, to move forward." He nodded, tears spilling now. And still I didn't hug him. Didn't linger. "I'll let Marianne know you said what you needed to," I said, reaching for the door. "You're not staying?" he asked, not pleading, just asking. I turned one hand on the frame. "Forgiveness doesn't require a return, Dad. I made peace. But that doesn't mean I'm coming back." His eyes closed again. Maybe from fatigue. Maybe because he already knew that would be my answer. Outside the hospital, the air was crisp. A little too bright. As I walked back to the car, my phone buzzed, an email from Grace about the new European partnership and a message from a young founder I'd been mentoring. "Your talk changed everything for me. I'm not afraid to be visible anymore." I smiled. Not because it made me feel powerful, but because it reminded me that what I gave the world had already moved far beyond what I ever needed from him. I always knew that if I ever got the chance to give something back, I wouldn't name it after PulseLink or some clever acronym with tech in the middle. I would name it after the girl I used to be, the one nobody believed in. The girl who once typed JavaScript in a shared dorm room under flickering lights, knowing she couldn't call home for help. The girl who once got a rejection letter from her family's legacy but still believed her code could fix things in the world no one else seemed to notice. And so, when the IPO closed and my bank account screamed a number I couldn't process, I called Grace. "I want to start a foundation," I told her. "But not just for girls in tech. For girls who were told tech wasn't for them." She didn't even pause. "Where do we start?" The Avery Collins Foundation began not with a press release but with a wire transfer. $10 million taken directly from the share pool I'd once been excluded from. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same shares I'd been told I didn't deserve were now funding a new generation of girls who looked like me, thought like me, and had parents who probably told them to choose a safer major. A quieter dream. We built a team quickly, female-led community, rooted, deliberately designed without the usual boardroom politics. The scholarship didn't require a perfect GPA. It didn't ask for letters of recommendation from guidance counselors who'd never said your name correctly. It just asked, "What problem do you want to solve with tech and why does it matter to you?" The essays we received broke something open in me. A girl from Tulsa who wanted to code an app that helped undocumented parents track school immunizations without risking legal exposure. A girl from Queens who is teaching herself Python at night because her school didn't offer computer science. A girl in Michigan who built a working AI chatbot to help her autistic brother communicate but was told by her aunt to stop wasting her time on machines. Their stories were different, but the echoes were the same. You're not supposed to want this. Not you. Not girls like you. So we funded them. We gave out laptops and tuition and one-on-one mentorships. We hosted weekend code camps in cities nobody ever built tech hubs in. We hired alumni from the first wave to lead the next. We weren't just building coders, we were building courage. I gave a keynote at one of our first events in Chicago. A room full of high school girls in mismatched hoodies and secondhand sneakers, eyes shining with curiosity. I told them the truth. You don't need to be from the right family. Or have the right last name. You just need to believe the idea in your head is worth building. And if no one helps you, build it anyway. One girl came up to me afterward. Couldn't have been older than 16. Braided hair. Laptop covered in stickers. She didn't introduce herself, just said, "They told me this kind of life wasn't for me. That I should do something more feminine. But I don't want to build websites for weddings. I want to build robots for disaster relief." I smiled. "Then let's get to work." That night I went home and sat at my desk, the same one where I once received an email from Sequoia and thought my hands would never stop shaking. I looked around my office, now decorated with photos of our scholarship recipients, framed blueprints of projects they'd built, a quote on the wall from one of them. "Code doesn't care what I look like. So why should anyone else?" The flowers my family had sent months earlier had long since wilted. I never replaced them. Their absence felt more honest than their presence ever had. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't use the foundation to repair my relationship with the Collins name, why I didn't position it as a family legacy reimagined. My answer is simple: because it's not about the past. It's about all the girls still fighting for a future they're told they don't belong to. The Avery Collins Foundation wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of reclamation. Not to take something from those who once rejected me, but to give something to those who still need to believe they're enough. I didn't need the Collins name on a building. I had something better. A generation of girls who knew they were allowed to take up space in rooms that once tried to shrink them. Girls who didn't ask for permission. Girls who coded through the night with nobody watching, just like I once did, and this time I was watching for them. The day I received the National Medal of Technology, the sky over DC was a perfect blue, not a single cloud, not a single doubt. I stood on the marble steps outside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, flanked by scientists, engineers, and inventors whose names I had grown up reading in textbooks. It felt surreal to be among them. Not because I didn't believe I belonged, but because there was a time I thought no one ever would. A photographer adjusted his lens and asked us to arrange ourselves for the official press photo. Dr. Lynn in the center and then Avery Collins next to her, please. He didn't say it twice. He didn't ask if I was a +1. He didn't spell check my last name against someone else's reputation. I stepped into the center. Someone handed me the framed medal moments later. It was heavier than I expected, but not because of the medal. Because of everything it took to get there. As the camera clicked, I felt something quiet settle inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, but stillness. The kind that comes when you know you have nothing left to prove. That night back at my home in Boston, I stood in my hallway staring at an old photo my mother had once framed taken at my sister's engagement party a lifetime ago. Everyone's in it, my parents, my siblings, champagne, flutes raised mid-toast. I used to stare at that picture like it held a secret code, wondering why I could never find myself in it, and then I realized I was in it. Just barely. Half a shoulder at the edge. Cropped out like an afterthought. I never threw it away. I never replaced it either. I just let it live in the hallway, a silent witness to who they once saw me as. Now a new photo joined it on the wall. The one from DC. The one where I stood fully centered, framed by light and recognition. Not because someone gave me a seat, but because I built the damn table myself. I didn't frame it in gold, just simple oak, solid, quiet. Like the foundation of something that would last. Later that week, I gave a talk to a group of young women in a STEM accelerator program. One of them asked me a question I hadn't heard in a long time. When did you know you made it? I thought about it for a second. About the IPO, the awards, the foundation, the articles, but none of those felt quite right. So I said, when I stopped needing the people who never saw me to see me. She nodded, not confused. Not needing more, just understood. That's when I knew this story was no longer just mine. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been cut from the frame. Anyone who sat through family dinners pretending they weren't bleeding. Anyone who was told they were too much or not enough. This was for the girls who code in secret. The women who pitch ideas with trembling voices. The founders who are the only woman in the room and still take up space like they own it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming someone I could be proud of. And maybe, just maybe, someone they'd be proud of too, even if they never say it out loud. The next morning, I walked past the two photos in my hallway. The old one shadowed and tight. The new one centered and bright. I didn't feel the need to take the old photo down. That version of me deserved to be remembered too. But I did something I hadn't before. I turned the light on above it. The day I received the National Medal of Technology, the sky over DC was a perfect blue, not a single cloud, not a single doubt. I stood on the marble steps outside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, flanked by scientists, engineers, and inventors whose names I had grown up reading in textbooks. It felt surreal to be among them. Not because I didn't believe I belonged, but because there was a time I thought no one ever would. A photographer adjusted his lens and asked us to arrange ourselves for the official press photo, Dr. Lynn in the center, and then Avery Collins next to her, please. He didn't say it twice. He didn't ask if I was a +1. He didn't spell check my last name against someone else's reputation. I stepped into the center. Someone handed me the framed medal moments later. It was heavier than I expected, but not because of the medal. Because of everything it took to get there. As the camera clicked, I felt something quiet settle inside me. Not triumph. Not revenge. But stillness. The kind that comes when you know you have nothing left to prove. That night back at my home in Boston, I stood in my hallway staring at an old photo my mother had once framed taken at my sister's engagement party a lifetime ago. Everyone's in it, my parents, my siblings, champagne flutes raised mid-toast. I used to stare at that picture like it held a secret code, wondering why I could never find myself in it. And then I realized I was in it. Just barely. Half a shoulder at the edge, cropped out like an afterthought. I never threw it away. I never replaced it either. I just let it live in the hallway, a silent witness to who they once saw me as. Now a new photo joined it on the wall. The one from DC. The one where I stood fully centered, framed by light and recognition. Not because someone gave me a seat, but because I built the damn table myself. I didn't frame it in gold. Just simple oak. Solid, quiet. Like the foundation of something that would last. Later that week, I gave a talk to a group of young women in a STEM accelerator program. One of them asked me a question I hadn't heard in a long time. When did you know you made it? I thought about it for a second. About the IPO, the awards, the foundation, the articles. But none of those felt quite right. So, I said, when I stopped needing the people who never saw me to see me. She nodded, not confused. Not needing more. Just understood. That's when I knew this story was no longer just mine. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been cut from the frame. Anyone who sat through family dinners pretending they weren't bleeding. Anyone who was told they were too much or not enough. This was for the girls who code in secret. The women who pitch ideas with trembling voices. The founders who are the only woman in the room and still take up space like they own it. It wasn't about revenge. It was about becoming someone I could be proud of. And maybe, just maybe, someone they'd be proud of too, even if they never say it out loud. The next morning, I walked past the two photos in my hallway. The old one shadowed and tight, the new one centered and bright. I didn't feel the need to take the old photo down. That version of me deserved to be remembered too. But I did something I hadn't before. I turned the light on above it.